because it touches on a little bit of what they talked about. You know, I remember when my own mom struggled with addiction, and my grandmother raised me for a big chunk of my early life. And I remember after one particularly bad overdose, sitting beside her bed and being just angry that mom had taken this stuff to begin with, but then just desperately hoping and praying, Jesus, please let her wake up from this. And that's what addiction does to our families. It sort of combines this incredible frustration, but also we still love the people who suffer, and we still want them to get better, even when we're frustrated when they take a wrong turn. But what I got with my mom, who's been clean and sober for nearly 10 years now, thank you. And hearing these stories, I almost feel guilty that I got it. But I'm so grateful that we got that second chance with my mom, because now I've got, my oldest kid is 7 years old, and the only thing that he knows about mom is that she's the best grandma a boy could ask for. And I want more of you and more of the families here in Philadelphia to get that second chance with a loved one. I want them to have another opportunity to get back on that horse and get clean, knowing that sometimes they're going to fall off the horse, but we want to give them another opportunity to get back on. I want a leadership that makes our streets safe enough where kids can make a mistake without it taking their lives from them. I want a country where our leaders put the interests of our citizens first, and I want Donald J. Trump to be back in the White House, because he's the only person running who is going to do exactly that. Now, I want to say just two things here before I take some questions from the media. The first is, again, thank you all for being here. Seriously, I cannot tell you how grateful I am. We could do so much better. We could do so much better in this country with better leadership. We could give kids those second chances, and we could make sure that the next time we're here in Philadelphia, we're hearing stories of triumph and hope, of second chances successful, and not of kids who have lost their lives. We've just got to have better leadership. But the second message I want to leave you with, and this is for the media, because there are real stories to tell. There are real heartbreaks and real stories of hope and triumph. But there is a person who is asking, she's going to be here later today, Kamala Harris, our border czar, is asking the American people to make her the next president of the United States. And yet for 16 days and counting, the American media has been unable to ask her a question. Now, agree or disagree with me and President Trump, nobody would dispute that we will go anywhere and we will talk to anyone and we will answer any question, because we will answer any question because we think we owe it to the American people to try to persuade them instead of running from them. And that's what Kamala Harris has done. She is running a basement campaign where she refuses to go before the free press and actually answer their questions. Well, what kind of an election can you have if your own presidential candidate won't actually answer tough questions? And so I'd ask the American media to show a little bit of shame and to demand that before you give Kamala Harris your endorsement, and that's what the media has done, you at least force her to answer some tough questions and to stand before the American people and persuade them. Thank you. Kamala Harris ought to stand before the American people and persuade them of why she's the right choice. She ought to answer for the fact that she wanted to ban fracking and now she allegedly doesn't. She ought to answer for the fact that she wanted to defund the police. She ought to answer for the fact that she opened up the American southern border, and she ought to answer for the fact that groceries are unaffordable and housing is unaffordable because of her policies. So to the media, please, for the love of God, do a better job. The American people demand it. Thank you all for being here. God bless you guys. I love you all, and I'm especially grateful to the folks behind me for offering testimony so people can understand what the consequences are of failed leadership. God bless you all, and thank you. Calm down. We've got to give the fake news a few questions here. I'm sure we have hopefully a few honest journalists here in the audience. Ma'am. So first of all, the reason I didn't say a whole lot about Tim Walz is because the Democrats have showed a willingness to pull a little switcheroo on us. So I don't even know if we're actually going to get Tim Walz out of this campaign. And I think that a lot of us are asking ourselves, well, it's not going to be official until the Democrats actually nominate him, I guess, at their convention next week. So that's the first reason. The second reason is, look, Tim Walz's record is a joke. He's been one of the most far-left radicals in the entire United States government at any level. But I think that what Tim Walz's selection says is that Kamala Harris has bent the knee to the far left of her party, which is what she always does. Kamala Harris listened to the Hamas wing of the party. She selected Tim Walz, a guy who wants to ship more manufacturing jobs to China, who wants to give illegal aliens driver's license, and who wants to make the fentanyl crisis that we just heard about so much worse because he refuses to do his job and actually make it easier for American citizens and not illegal aliens to live a good life. So I think what it says is that Kamala Harris is running as a San Francisco liberal. She is governed as a San Francisco liberal, and she's chosen a running mate who will be a San Francisco-style liberal. The last thing that I'll say about Tim Walz is, to her credit, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz do make an interesting team, because if we remember the rioting in the summer of 2020, Tim Walz was the guy who let rioters burn down Minneapolis, and then Kamala Harris was the one who bailed the rioters out of jail. So there's an interesting team in that sense. Sir. Well, if you build a 100-foot wall, you're going to have a lot fewer illegal aliens coming into this country, and it's obvious, and it worked when Donald Trump was president. Look, no one has ever said a wall keeps out 100% of illegal aliens, but if it keeps out 98%, I'd say we're doing pretty good. And that means less fentanyl, less drugs, and less crime coming into our communities. So I was at the border just a few days ago. It's a lot hotter down there in South Arizona than it is here in Philadelphia. And I remember seeing the slats of border wall just sitting on the ground. And why are they sitting on the ground instead of being constructed? Because Kamala Harris said you're not allowed to construct border wall anymore. That means more fentanyl in South Philly. That means more orphan children. That means more suffering Americans, and we can't let Kamala Harris forget it. Ma'am.
To say he was along for the ride after he was chosen as Vice President Harris.
Could you repeat the beginning of that? I missed the first one.
Earlier today, you said that you called Governor Walz, so clearly at least part of you believes that he could be the vice presidential candidate. Are you saying that you will not debate him, or will you agree to go on the debate stage with Tim Walz?
No, I absolutely want to debate Tim Walz, but I want to debate him actually after he's actually officially the nominee. And I did call him and congratulate him and offered him my best wishes. I think that's the polite thing to do. But look, would it shock me if the Democrats pulled another switcheroo? No, it wouldn't. So look, we're going to wait until they actually nominate Kamala Harris and Tim Walz before we do any debates. And then, of course, we want to have a robust debate again because we believe the American people have the right to have their political leaders try to persuade them. And that is what's so scandalous about Kamala Harris's basement campaign. 16 days she has been the presumptive nominee of the Democrat Party. 0 times she has sat for a real media interview. That's a disgrace. Nobody should ask to lead the American people unless she's willing to answer tough questions. And if she's too afraid of the American media, how is she possibly going to deal with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping and a bunch of world leaders all over the globe? Yeah, go ahead. I can hear you now. Well, my message to voters who want to see less division, look, I want to see less division as well, but division starts at the top. And you saw Donald Trump, who took a bullet 2 weeks ago and called for national calm and unity. That is the kind of unifying message that we need in this country. But we're not going to have real unity in the United States of America when you have a border czar who's running as president of the United States who welcomed cartels and welcomed drugs into our communities. The division comes from bad leadership. We fix the bad leadership, and I think we have a great country from people from all political walks of life. Unity will come, but only after we get rid of the bad leadership. And you asked about the strategy. Look, the strategy is simple. We know that there are 6 or 7 states that are going to decide this election. We think that it is shameful that Kamala Harris is running from tough questions from the media. So I'm going to go to every single battleground state that I can. I'm going to answer tough questions. I'm going to talk to people because that is the minimum that you should do if you want to be the president or vice president of the United States of America. In the red, ma'am. And then behind you in the white shirt. Yeah.
Do you see him as an easier candidate?
Well, look, the only thing I'll say about Josh Shapiro is I genuinely, there's some fans out here, I genuinely feel bad that for days, maybe even weeks, the guy actually had to run away from his Jewish heritage because of what the Democrats are saying about him. I think that's scandalous and disgraceful. Whatever you believe or whatever disagreements on policy you have about somebody, the fact that that race, the vice presidential race on the Democratic side, became so focused on his ethnicity, I think is absolutely disgraceful, and it's insulting to Americans, whatever background you're from. But look, I'm not relieved or non-relieved about who Kamala Harris chose because, look, Kamala Harris is the problem. Kamala Harris was the border czar. Kamala Harris has had the policies that have caused so many people to needlessly suffer. We're going to run against Kamala Harris because she's the problem, and she's the one asking to be the people's president of the United States. Though I'd say she's not actually asking. She's given teleprompter speeches. She's given scripted remarks. She's not actually doing the bare minimum we should expect of a person who wants to be the people's president. Yeah.
The choice of Tim Walz, the argument that was made for him is that he will help Democrats in the Midwest with white working class voters, perhaps. Can you address that argument?
Look, I'm skeptical that whoever the VP nominee is, most people are voting at the top of the ticket. But here's the thing about Tim Walz. Look, Tim Walz is a guy who wants to take children away from their parents if the parents don't agree to do sex changes and the school wants to. That's crazy, right? A fundamental violation of parental rights. Tim Walz is a guy who wants to ship more and more American manufacturing jobs to China. He said it on camera in the name of the green energy scam. Well, if you care about the environment, and I certainly do, why are you going to ship American manufacturing jobs to the dirtiest economy in the world? Why wouldn't you keep them right here in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, in the places that really need it? This is a guy who, when rioters were burning down the biggest city in Minnesota, was actively cheering them on. You think the black business leaders in Minneapolis are grateful, the working class business leaders are grateful that Tim Walz allowed rioters to burn down their businesses? You think that people are grateful to have a guy who wants to ship manufacturing jobs off to China? There's no way the American people are going to buy it. It just doesn't make sense. And again, the biggest problem with the Tim Walz pick, it's not Tim Walz himself, it's what it says about Kamala Harris. That when given an opportunity, she will bend the knee to the most radical elements of her party. That's exactly what she did here. That's what she's going to keep on doing as president. That's why we got to elect Donald J. Trump, president of the United States. And I'll take just a couple more here, and then we got to hit the road. Thank you all.
Senator, do you think you have any similarities with Walz? And you're both from the Midwest, and you have worked very much.
Can you start that again?
Yeah, do you think you have any similarities? And you can talk about like common ground that you share with Walz.
Well, look, I mean, yeah, we're white guys from the Midwest. I guess there are similarities there. But what's different is the actual ideas about how best to serve people, white, black, or anything else, in the Midwest and everywhere else, right? I can't believe this is a guy who tries to claim that he stands for working people, and yet he wants to pursue energy policies that are going to ship everybody's job to China. In some ways, what Tim Walz represents is doubling down on failed 30 years of leadership in this country where we don't make enough of our own stuff. We don't use enough of our own workers to make enough of our own stuff. We rely on everybody else for energy instead of American citizens, and then we throw open the southern border to make our communities less livable and less safe. He is the double down choice for failed leadership. And again, Kamala Harris selected him. I don't know why, but I think it's because she's fundamentally a radical herself and she wanted a partner in crime. Ma'am.
Can we talk a bit about foreign policy? Let's talk a little bit about foreign policy. Could you tell me how you handle the two largest conflicts in the world today, that being in Ukraine and also in Israel? Not so much what has been done wrong, but what you would do going forward.
Well, I think the most important thing you got to do is kick Kamala Harris the hell out of office, right? I mean, that's going to make the world a lot more safer and more secure. Look, in Israel, I think it's actually very simple. What we all want, meaning the Israelis and any American with an ounce of common sense, which I think is 99% of our country, we want the war to end. We want Hamas to be destroyed. And then we want the Israelis to be able to build a peace process with the Sunni Arab neighbors to build a counterbalance to Iran. That's it, right? It's very simple. Now, the problem is Kamala Harris, on the one hand, says that she really cares about civilian casualties and really wants the war to end, and yet she refuses to give Israel the weapons that allow them to minimize civilian casualties and bring the war to a close end. It's the dumbest policy, maybe in the history of American foreign policy, to prolong this war, to promote the death of innocent civilians, and that is the Kamala Harris approach to the Middle East. Now, in Russia and Ukraine, I saw a report just a couple of days ago that the Ukrainians are running out of fighting men to actually staff the war. You've got to believe in peace, and you've got to bring peace to that region of the world. Russia would have never invaded Ukraine if Donald Trump was president. And now, thank you. And now we are where we are. And if you want to bring peace to that region, you need a negotiator who Vladimir Putin respects. Does anybody here, and obviously we're in a biased crowd, but does anybody here actually think that Vladimir Putin respects Kamala Harris? She's afraid of all of you. She sure as hell isn't going to be able to sit in an audience with Vladimir Putin and push for a reasonable peace. So we've got to have a person who understands diplomacy, who understands that America does have negotiating leverage, that shuts off energy in places, or shuts off access to energy in places where you have bad guys running the energy policy, rebuilds the American energy sector, allows us to project power overseas, and makes Vladimir Putin know that we got to bring peace, and you got to have a respect for an American president who can do that. And then we'll do one more question. Well, look, it's ultimately President Trump's decision, but President Trump has shown again and again, as much as the media accused him of being a wild cowboy, President Trump believes in the power of diplomacy. Love a guy or hate a guy, disagree with a foreign leader or agree with him, you've got to be willing to engage in diplomacy. The Kamala Harris approach of saber rattling while the world goes to hell has clearly not worked. We've got a war in the Middle East, we've got a war in Europe, we've got threatened war in East Asia. Kamala Harris's approach has failed. Donald Trump's approach delivered world peace. I think I know who I'm supporting in 2024. One final question. Go ahead, ma'am.
What would you say to the millions of women that have been offended by your childless cat women comments? And also, do you have any plans for the 11 million of undocumented Hispanic people who have been paying taxes in the U.S. for decades?
Well, look, the plan with people who have come into the country illegally is you've got to be willing to deport some of them. I mean, this is not rocket science. If you've got 20 million illegal aliens in this country, not all of them are bad people. Most of them are probably very good people. But if you break the law to come into this country, you've got to be willing to send some of those people back. That's the Donald Trump approach. And if you don't do that, you don't have a real border. And the people who will suffer the most are the people right behind me who are going to continue to have their communities poisoned by the fentanyl that the Mexican drug cartels bring across that open border. Now, you asked about the remarks that I made you said that they were offensive to millions of women. Well, here's what I'd say. Thank you, ma'am. I love you too. What I said is very simple. I think American families are good and government policy should be more pro-family. Now, if the media wants to get offended about a sarcastic remark I made before I even ran for the United States Senate, then the media is entitled to get offended. You know what I'm offended by? I'm offended that normal Americans can't afford grocery prices. I'm offended that Kamala Harris opened up the American southern border and allowed fentanyl to come into our communities. And I'm offended that she wants to be the people's president, but she won't even answer tough questions. That's what I'm offended by, and I think that's what most Americans are offended by too. And I guess on that note, I should say, thank you all for having me. It's great to be here. If I can ask you to just do one thing. We have got thank you. We have got an incredible amount of momentum. We've got an incredible amount of capacity to win this race, but it's going to require every single one of us doing everything we can. So, our national motto is "In God We Trust." God tells us to hope and not despair. So let's get out there, let's work the phones, let's knock on the doors, let's get everybody out there to vote, and let's re-elect Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. I know I can count on you. God bless you guys. I love you. Thank you.